All right, guys, we are going to be covering homework 7 today. Now be careful because this is actually only part of homework 7. Homework 7 is long. It's the only homework we're doing this week. So today I'm going to be covering numbers 1 through 31, kind of the preliminary stuff. We will get into the other part of it on the second unit or the second lecture. So don't wait on this. This is a long homework. It's kind of tedious. It can really stack up on you, so make sure you get as much done as you can. Basically, the idea of homework 7 is percentages. What we're going to be doing today, though, is talking about conversions, because we're going to be doing percent word problems, okay? Tax is 8% on this much, how much is that, that kind of stuff. But the problem is, to be able to do that stuff, you have to be able to convert between decimal, fraction, and percentages, okay? That's the key trick here. We have to be able to convert between these three constantly. Frequently, decimal and percent are the main ones, but oftentimes fractions are involved too. So just something we got to cover. That's what we're going to be going over mostly today. And again, we're covering 1 through 31 in homework 7. If the numbers change, I'll let you know, but that should be the case. Real quick, I'll say something about percentages. Even though that's really not the focus of today's lecture. Today's lecture is conversions. Percentage means out of 100. A ratio of 100. It always means 100. That's the key. Always, always, always percent means 100, out of 100. So if it's 77%, that's 77 out of 100. If it's 2,400%, it's 2,400 out of 100, okay, or over 100. Percent always means out of 100. That's really all we need to say about percentages today. We'll talk more about them later. The bottom line is you can't use them in problems. If I asked you to take 7% of 45, we'll talk about that more in the next lecture, but that's not something you can do without converting that percentage into a decimal, right? So again, today's focus is on conversions. We'll start with the simpler ones and the more important ones, honestly. Let's talk about how to convert a percentage to a decimal. Okay, a percentage to a decimal. And again, percentage just means out of 100. So let's say we'll start with something, pretty straightforward, 78%. Think about what you just said, 78%. Our money system is out of 100 too, right? Our pennies work out of 100 pennies in a dollar. So fortunately, the pennies system works very similar to the percent system. If you say 78%, 78 cents, well, then the decimal would be 0.78, because it's not what 78 cents looks like, right? Similar, if I said I had 4%, you could think about that as 4 cents, 4 out of 100. So be careful, it would look like that, right? Because that's what, if you had 4 cents, that's how you'd write it, 4 pennies, 4 out of 100. What if I had, be careful now because people mess these up, 60%. That'd be 60 cents, 60%, 60 cents would look like this, right? Notice the zeros are not in the same place. And again, I'm just putting the line through it just to make it clear. You don't need to do that. So be careful with these. 4% is 0.04 because it's 4 cents. 60% is 0.6, or honestly, just 0.6. 0.60 or just 0.6. Either one is acceptable. That 0 on the end is not required. The 0 in the beginning is, so make sure you know the difference. And they're not always this obvious. What if we had something kind of large, 235%? You can absolutely have percentages over 100. If you invested in the stock market, you should get more than 100% of your money back, or you didn't make any money. So yes, absolutely percentages can go over 100. 235%, well, that would be 235 cents. So how would that be? Wouldn't that be $2.35? If you had 235 pennies, which is out of 100, wouldn't that be $2.35? We'll talk about, some of y'all are probably already seen, there's actually a more straightforward way to convert. You don't even have to do the cents thing, the pennies thing, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Some of y'all are probably already seen it. And then sometimes you'll get strange looking ones, like 0.012%, or 0.0712%, something like that. This one is where it gets a little more difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what the answer looks like here, and we'll come back to how I knew that in just a moment. For now, that's what it is, all right? We'll come back to what the rule is in a minute. I actually want to go ahead and do decimal to percent, and then we're going to unify it all up with one rule, okay? I probably need to make my decimals a little more obvious, don't I? All right. So 0.0712%. You can have a percentage well under 1. Hopefully the mortality rate of a virus is less than 1%, obviously. So 0.0712% converts to 0.000712. Now again, that one you can't do with pennies in mind, because our penny system doesn't go out that far. So that one requires a little bit different trick. For now, we're going to put a pin in that. I will explain it here shortly. Let's go ahead and go the other way for a minute, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's go to decimal to percent. It's going to be very, very straightforward. We're going to go back and forth here. So similarly, if I had 0.53 as a decimal, you could say, well, that's the same as 53 cents, right? Well, 53 cents means 53%. All right. So it's very similar to the way we went a minute ago. If I gave you 0.7, hopefully you recognize that as 0.70, so 70 cents, so 70%. And again, remember, I will give you a rule in just a moment. The penny thing, thinking it out like that, it's nice and it works most of the time, but it doesn't work all of the time. Here we have 0.03 or 3 cents. So that would be what? 3%, right? 4.75. Now that's, again, think about pennies here. That'd be $4.57, 457 pennies, 457 cents, 457%, right? So the penny thing works most of the time. It just doesn't work on these very small numbers. 0.0314, we'll say. If I wanted to write that one as a percent, just again, I'll give you the rule in just a moment, but that would be 3.914%. All right, so take a look at these two different charts. We've done, 4 or 5 of each, and see if you can tell me what the rule is, what it is I'm doing. I'll write it on another sheet. I'm gonna write it on this sheet up here just to have it all on the same page. I will write it on the next one as well. Again, the penny thing works pretty good. 78%, 78 cents, 4%, 4 cents, 60%, 6 cents, 235, well, that's 235 pennies, so $2.35. And again, it works most of the time. It's these bottom numbers where the penny thing kind of falls apart. So hopefully you're realizing that really all that we're doing here is moving a decimal around. Come over to the decimals in here and look at this. I took the decimal that was in front of the 0.53, and what did I do? Well, it ended up just being 53. Well, where's the decimal on 53? It's behind it, right? That's not really writing very well. But basically what happened was we took the decimal and went twice to the right. We took the decimal and went twice to the right. We took the decimal and went twice to the right. We took the decimal and went twice to the right. We took the decimal and went twice to the right. So when you're converting decimal to percent, you move this decimal, well, let's write it out in words. You move it out twice to the right, and that's the key, to the right. You take that decimal and you move it twice to the right, and you have your percentage. Percentages are the other way. Think about 78. Where's the decimal on 78? Well, it's at the end of it, right? And then we moved it left twice. The decimal on 4 is at the end of it. Then we moved it left twice. The decimal on 60 is at the end of it. Then we moved it left twice. 235, we moved it left twice to make 2.35. 0.0712, we still moved it left twice, which ended up adding 2 zeros. So from percent to decimal, you go twice to the left. I think I was saying right the whole time, but it's left. 1, 2 to the left, 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 1, 2 to the left. Over here, we move them all to the right. So that's the nice thing. Converting between decimals and percentages really does come down to just moving the decimal twice to the left or twice to the right, okay? So let's go ahead and I'll show you a way I help myself remember this, because it's easy to mess this up. It's easy to say, okay, I only have to move the decimal twice one way, but then, then you forget which way it goes, and then in the test, you're getting them all backwards, and it's no good at all. So let's go ahead and write that out again. Just give another quick example. I mean, we've said what we need to say here, but I just want to kind of bring it home. Let's say we had something like 24.75, right? And that was a decimal. How would I convert that to a percentage? Well, what did we say just a minute ago, right? We said decimal to percent, that's going to be twice to the right. Take the decimal and go twice to the right. So that would be 2475 with the decimal on the end now, percent. So 24.75 becomes 2,475, right? Just again, to practice here, just to make sure we're clear. And then if I had a percentage, let's say 47.3%, and I wanted to convert that into a decimal, just like we said a minute ago, if you're trying to convert percent to decimal, you go twice to the left, right? So I would take this decimal, I would go twice to the left, and I would have 0.473, okay? So just to reiterate the rule. Now, how do you keep it straight? Which way's left, which way's right? It's always two spaces, so that's the nice thing. Here's what I did. This is what I did as a student. I'm not saying this is the most brilliant thing ever. It's kind of basic, but it is what I did as a student. I noticed that if you wrote out the alphabet, right, A, B, C, D, E, blah, 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 LMNO, P, that decimal and percent, D and P would be laid out like that in the alphabet, right? A, B, C, D, blah, 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 LMNO, P, Q, R, S, and all that. Well, luckily, the alphabetic layout is the way it's supposed to be. If you're going from decimal to percent, you're going to the right. Think about it. We took this decimal, we went twice to the right to make that percent. If you're going from percent, let's just go ahead and move that over. If you're going from percent to decimal, you're moving to the left. Take a minute and validate this for a second. Make sure you agree. When we had the decimal, we took the decimal and went twice to the right to make the percent. Once we had the percent, we moved twice to the left to make the decimal. So if you're at the decimal, D, and you need to go to the percent, P, wouldn't that be to the right? And if you're already at P, percent, and you need to go to the decimal, wouldn't that be to the left? And isn't it always two spaces? This is how I remembered it as a student. I would, if I was having trouble or something, I would just remember the alphabet. If I'm starting at the D, the decimal, I need to go to the P, the percent. D comes, if I write it out, it's left of it, so I'd go to the right. If I'm starting out at the P, the percent, and I need to move left to make the decimal, it would be, or I need to move to the D, it'd be to the left, so two spaces to the left. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I always did. Bottom line, you just have to remember which way it goes. How you remember that, totally up to you. But this stupid little chart here is what I used to use as a student. So that's decimal to percent, just to I'll bring the main paper back one time. So this is the most important of the conversions. Luckily, it's, I don't want to say the easiest because that's subjective, but it's certainly one of the more straightforward. If you're going from percent to decimal, you move it twice to the left. If you're going from decimal to percent, you move it twice to the right, and you do not concern yourself with how ugly the answer looks. Do not do that on a test. Don't talk yourself out of it because you go, well, oh, I got 0.0712%. Yeah, but if I move that to the left, that's going to get weird looking. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Nobody said convert it to a normal looking decimal. We said take the percent and turn it into a decimal, which means move that decimal twice to the left, period. All right, so that's the conversions there. Take a minute, make sure you're clear on that, and we'll move on to the next bit. All right, so again, that's decimal to percent, that's percent to decimal. Those are the main conversions, and those are the ones you're gonna be doing the most, but they're not the only conversions, all right? So we'll go ahead and talk about going from fraction to decimal, and from decimal to fraction. Okay. Now the good news is one of these you already know, because we've already done this. When we did the decimal unit, you converted fractions to decimal already. You might be saying, no, we didn't. I didn't say that, right? At no point did I tell you, what the hell, you can't even read that word, fraction, sorry guys. At no point did I tell you you were converting fractions to decimals, but you did. Think about it. If I gave you the fraction 7/8 or 7/8, and I asked you to convert this to a decimal, you might not be super clear on how to do that. But think about how you take a fraction and think about how we've gotten a decimal from it before. Didn't we just divide it? Didn't we say in the past, I didn't call it a fraction, I just said take 7 and divide it by 8 and give me the decimal answer. Well, that's a fraction, and the division will convert it to a decimal. 7 divided by 8. Remember which way this sets up, be careful. Where's your decimal before you start dividing? Don't forget how decimal division works. That's 7, the number 7 divided by 8, so the decimal is behind the 7. This is what I warned y'all about when I said that the long division was not going to go away. It's going to come back, and it's going to come back in full force. So review homework, I believe it's homework 3 that covers decimal division. If you need to, go back and review there. So 8 goes into 7 0 times. We can go ahead and move over. 8 goes into 70 8 times. You know, your times tables, guys, speeds this up. 8 times 8 is 64. 70 minus 64 is 6. Remember, with decimals, you got to keep going until it ends. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. 60 minus 56 is 4. Didn't end. We keep going. 8 goes into 40 5 times, and then that's going to be clean, right? 5 times 8 is 40. So the answer is, how do you go from fraction to decimal? You divide. That didn't really show it very well. You divide. To go from fraction to decimal, you divide. It's that straightforward. That doesn't make it easy, because the division of decimals is kind of annoying. Some of y'all have realized that. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's what it is, okay? So whether I give you a regular fraction, I might give you an improper fraction. I might say 3 4/5. You have a couple of options here. You could convert the 4/5 and then add it to the 3 as a decimal. I kind of like to just convert the whole thing at once to avoid confusion, but this is not the only way. As long as you convert it properly, that's what matters. So 3 times 5 is 15 plus 4, that's 19 over 5. And then we just do the division again. 19 divided by 5. Notice it's not telling me to round or anything like that. It is possible you will need to round, just like anytime you divide with decimals. So keep an eye on the instructions. If they tell you to round, then you're going to have to round. And again, know where your decimal is. That's 5. That's 19 divided by 5. The decimal is after the number 19. And here we go. 5 doesn't go into 1, so we can move over. 5 goes into 19 3 times. There's that 3, right? 3 times 5 is 15. Subtract, we get 4. We bring down. 5 goes into 40 8 times. And again, just nice and clean, 3.8. Okay? So 3 4/5, or 19 over 5, turned into 3.8. 7/8 turned into 0.875. And so again, really all I'm doing is dividing the fraction, and it gives me a decimal. So this conversion you already knew. I didn't call it turning into a fraction into a decimal before. I just said, hey, take the fraction and divide it. But that's what we were doing, right? Now be careful. Sometimes they will round. Sometimes they will repeat. Let's say we had 10/3. It's going to be the same idea. 10 divided by 3, all right? So 3 on the outside, 10 on the inside. And again, make sure you know where your decimal is. Let's move this up a little bit. That's 10 with the decimal at the end, and then we go. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. We subtract, we get 1. Bring down to 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, we get 1. Bring down to 0. And you can already see where this is going. 3 goes into 10 3 times. So this is just going to repeat. So it'll be 3.3 repeating, if you wanted to summarize that. So that's how you convert fraction to decimal. You simply just do the division out. You might have to round. You might have to take care of repetition with decimals, just like before. So nothing crazy there. But that's what it is, okay? So fraction to decimal, you already knew. Decimal to fraction is a little bit different and a little bit strange. I want to cram it in on this paper, but I'm a little worried I'm going to get too messy. So we'll just go ahead and do it on another sheet. That's fine. So decimal to fraction is a little bit different. This we have not done before. You might not have done this before at all. Luckily, it's not really super difficult in the sense of requiring a lot of strong math skills. It's just really just more about knowing your decimal places, which some of y'all have said is an issue. So let's take a number like 0.847. There's your decimal. How do I convert that into a fraction? Well, really what you're going to do is read the decimal places. Isn't that the tenths, hundredths, thousandths? Remember your decimal places. This is the key. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. If there was more, it'd be 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, and so on. So this is 847 thousandths. Think about what I just said. 847 thousandths. You literally just take the number and put it over the decimal place. Now, again, it is a fraction, so you will need to reduce if possible. Luckily, 847 over 1,000 does not reduce, but that is something you will need to keep in mind. So it's all about the decimal place value. So similar, if I had 0.052, how many decimal place values is that? Well, it's thousandth again, right? Tenths, hundredths, thousands. So we already know immediately this one's going to be over 1,000 to start with. They're not always over 1,000. Remember, we're not doing percentages, so these are not over 100. This is just decimal to fraction. Could be over 10, could be over 100, could be over 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million. Just depends on where the decimal place is. So 0.052 over 1,000, well, that's 52. 52 tenths, hundredths, thousands, 52 over 1,000. Now, you probably hopefully you're recognizing that this one is not done. 52 over 1,000 has a pretty clear reduction. You can reduce by 2. 52 divided by 2 is 26. Oh, excuse me, I almost said 100. 1,000 divided by 2 is 500. And then you look at that and we say, well, we can reduce again, can't we? So be careful. All the old rules are still here. You still got to reduce, all that kind of stuff. So 26 over 500, we can reduce by 2. 26 divided by 2 is 13, and 500 divided by 2 is 250. 13 over 250 does not reduce, and that would be our final answer there. So again, it's the number 52, 052, 52 over 10, 100, 1,000. All right? And then reduce, of course. What if we had a number like 4.1? Well, I think personally the easiest way to handle this is that 4 is a whole number. Isn't this just a mixed fraction? A mixed number? Wouldn't that be 4? And then what's that? 1/10, right? Because the first place is a tenth. 4 and 1/10. 4 and 1/10. Which we could then convert to what? 4 times 10 is 40 plus 1. That's 41 over 10 if they didn't want mixed number. Okay, it's just another option. 4.1, that's 4 and 1/10. 4 and 1/10. And then just converting it to improper fraction. If we had something like, let's say 32.07, all right? Well, that's 32, which is the whole number part. And then here we have 7/10. So the easiest way, in my opinion, to convert this is to say, well, that's 32. There's your whole number. And 7/10, 7/100. 32 and 7/100. And again, if we didn't want a mixed number, we could go ahead and convert that. 32 times 100 is 3,200 plus 7 would be 3,207, still over 100. So it just depends on what the problem asks for. If they don't care about improper mixed, then you can just leave them as mixed. If you want, you can convert them to improper. But the bottom line is decimal to fraction doesn't, other than the reduction, doesn't really involve much math. It's more taking the number and putting it above its decimal place value, right? 847 over 10, 100,000, 847 over 1,000. 52,052 over 10, 100, 1,000, 52 over 1,000. Okay, so that's fraction to decimal. That's decimal to fraction. Just real quick to remind you. Fraction to decimal, we divided. Just take the decimal or the fraction and divide it and get your decimal. To go from decimal to fraction, it's more about knowing the place values and putting the value and putting the number over that place value. So these are a little weird. There's 6 conversions total. We covered decimal to percent, percent to decimal. Now we've covered decimal to fraction, fraction to decimal. So that's 4 out of the 6. Go ahead and take a minute, make sure you're comfortable, and then we'll move on to the last 2. All right, so let's go ahead and move into the last 2. Percent to fraction and fraction to percent, right? Because we already did decimal to percent and percent to decimal. Now we have to do the fractions. So we'll start off with percent to fraction. My marker's starting to die here. Percent to fraction. Now, here's the thing. Percent to fraction is kind of difficult to do sometimes. So the percents to fractions and the fractions to percents, these are the annoying ones because it just depends on the problem, how easy or hard they're going to be. So let's take 92%. Let's just jump right in. Let's say I gave you 92%. Well, I want to turn that into a fraction. And really, at the moment, the only thing that we know how to turn into a fraction is a decimal. I mean, think about it. We just did it, right? Take the decimal, put it over its place value, and that's how you get your fractions. So what a lot of people will do is they'll take a percent, convert it to a decimal, and then convert that to a fraction, rather a 3-step procedure, right? So 92%, converting that to a decimal, percent to decimal, we move the decimal twice to the left, so 0.92. And then you say, well, remember how to do this, that's 92 over 10s hundreds, that's 92 over 100. Similar, we could say 8%. And you could say, well, turning a percent into a decimal, that would be 0.08, right? Because we moved the decimal twice to the left. And then you say, well, that's 8 over 10s hundreds. That's 8 over 100. And then, of course, you'll need to reduce. Reduce by 2. 2 goes into 8 4 times. 2 goes into 100 25 times. I'm writing a little small. I'll try to make it bigger here in a second. Okay? Now, some of y'all are probably screaming at this. Oh, I think I just goofed that up. Yes, I did. That's 4 over 50. Excuse me. Don't let that fly. And then we got to reduce that again. See? Everybody can make mistakes, guys. Be careful. I almost let that one go. I almost didn't catch that. Yeah, so let's go over that again. I almost goofed there. 0.08, that's 8 over 100, tenths hundredths. 8 over 100 reduces by 2. 2 goes into 8 4 times. 2 goes into 150 times, not 25. And then we reduce by 2 again. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 goes into 50 25 times. Yeah, that's the problem with knowing the answer. Sometimes your brain just jumps right to it. So forgive me there. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, here's the thing. You might be looking at these two, and you might be going, dude, we did not need to turn these into a decimal. You already told us that percentage means out of 100. Well, true. So this percent turning it into a decimal thing, that is optional. And that's why, I put it down here. You don't have to do that. You could have said that's 92%. That's 92 over 100. That's 8%. That's 8 over 100. If you don't like the decimal step here, it is not required. Percent means over 100. So if you just want to go ahead and put it over 100, that's fine. So let's say let's do a little bit of a difficult one here. 4.83%. There's two different ways to handle this based upon the two different ways we just talked about. You can turn this into a decimal first. What would we do with this percent? How would we turn it into a decimal? Well, percent to decimal, remember the decimal goes twice to the left. So it'd be 0.0483. And then if I wanted to convert that into a fraction, it's over the decimal places, right? Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. This one would be 483, you don't need the 0, over 10,000, right? Think about what we just did. Converted the percent to a decimal, and then the decimal to a fraction. And that will not reduce. But kind of like we were saying in the other ones, isn't this just 4.83 over 100? So alternatively, this is or. You don't need to do both of these. It's one or the other. You could take 4.83 and just go ahead and set it over 100 because that's what percentage means. Percentage means over 100. So 4.83 over 100. The issue is you're not allowed to leave a decimal in a fraction like that. So if you do decide to put this one straight over 100, you're going to have to remember to adjust it. So you know how to do this. We've done this when we divide it. If we don't want decimals, we'll move it over twice, get rid of it, make it 483. Well, what you do to the top, you do to the bottom, and I will put that over 10,000. So it's up to you. If you want to just take the number, jam it over 100, that's fine. 92 over 100, 8 over 100, just don't forget to reduce. The problem is if you get a kind of a number with a decimal in the middle of it, you can still just put it over 100, but then you're going to need to move the decimal over until it disappears, and then do the same on the bottom. Personally, I think it's not a big deal to just take it, turn it into a decimal, and then turn the decimal into a fraction, but it's totally up to you. Generally speaking, I would recommend taking the 3-step procedure just because it's safer. It is not wrong to go the other way, but percent to decimal and then decimal to fraction. And that not only is it a little bit safer, it also reinforces your ability to go from percent to decimal and then decimal to fraction, right? It kind of forces you to do 3 conversions in one problem. You can skip straight to over 100, but just be careful. If you do that and there's a decimal, you will have to adjust it. So either way, that comes out to 483 over 10,000, okay? That's percent to fraction. You can put it over 100 straight up and reduce it, or you can convert it to a decimal first, then put it over whatever the decimal place value is. So these are the ones that are a little more complicated. Like I told you, they don't come up as often, but they still are. We need to talk about them. And the last one is going to be fraction to percent. So we just did percent to fraction. The last one here is going to be fraction to percent. Again, perfect timing because my marker's starting to die. Fraction to percent. Similar to the other way, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's take the fraction, let's turn it into a decimal, and then let's turn that into a percent. Because think about what we just said on the percent to fractions right underneath that. We know how to convert decimal to fraction. We know how to convert decimal to percent. So if we can take a percent, turn it into a decimal, we can make it a fraction. If we can take a fraction, turn it into a decimal, then we can make it a percent. So percent to fraction and fraction to percent sometimes require 3 steps. Going to decimals first, then getting what you want. So if we said something like 5 over 8, there's your fraction. I want to convert that to a percentage. If it was straight up over 100, let me do an easy one over here real quick. If we had 7 over 100, well, I mean, if it's over 100, my friends, then that's a percentage already, right? We already talked about this early on. If you get it over 100, that's a percent. So if you get lucky and your fraction's over 100, then that's the percent right there. That's not going to happen most of the time, okay? So we have 5 over 8. I need to convert that fraction to a percent. And really the way to do this is to turn it into a decimal first. Try to recall from earlier in the lecture how you convert a fraction to a decimal. You divide. So we'd have 5 divided by 8. Set up your, I'm just writing so small. Sorry, guys. I don't know why I'm writing so small today. 5 divided by 8, decimal out here behind the 5, bring it up. 8 goes into 5 0 times, we just move over. 8 goes into 50 6 times. And this marker really is dying fast too. 6 times 8 is 48. Subtract, we get 2. Bring down to 0. 8 goes into 20 twice. 2 times 8 is 16. Subtract, because remember, we're doing decimals here, and we got to keep going till it ends. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. So 5 over 8 converts to 0.625. So that's the decimal, right? Fraction to decimal, and now we have the decimal of 0.625. Now we need to take that, 0.625, and we need to convert that to a percent. Think about how you convert decimals to percentages. Decimal to percent, you'd move it twice to the right. So that would turn it into 62.5%. We went from fraction to decimal. Again, sorry about the fading marker, guys. We're almost done. We're going to have to tough it out. Fraction to decimal with division, and then decimal to percent just with moving the decimal left and right. Now, again, remember, if it's over 100, you can get it over to a percent immediately. Let's say we said, let's squeeze this in one over here. Let's say I said 3 over 20. Well, it'd be the same thing, really. You just divide it out. And you'd say, well, we'll go ahead and go down here. 3 over 20, that's going to be 3 divided by 20. Don't forget your decimal. Make sure you know where it is at all times, right? 20 doesn't go into 3, so we'll go ahead and extend this with a 0. 20 goes into 30 once. 1 times 20 is 20. And I'm trying to do some decimal division because some of y'all have emailed me saying you're not feeling comfortable with it. You're going to get some practice in this homework, so that's the nice thing. 20 goes into 100 5 times. Go ahead and do that math there. So 3 over 20 was 0.15. That's your decimal. And then 0.15, well, that's 15%. Right? So that's the thing. Converting fractions to percentages, you usually will need to stop over at the decimal and you get there with division. 3 divided by 20 is 0.15. Once we're at decimal to percent, we're just moving it twice to the right, and that makes 15%. Similar, or rather not similar, but another way to do it. Now, this is not always going to work, so I don't like to teach this as a method, but I don't want to ignore it either. 3 over 20. Didn't we say a minute ago that if I could get this over 100, I have the percentage straight away? We didn't do it here because you can't turn 8 into 100. But you can turn 20 into 100. So this is a bit of a shortcut. If I took 20 and multiplied it by 5, wouldn't that make 100? Well, what you do to the top, or bottom, you got to do to the top, right? 3 times 5 is 15. 15 over 100, that's 15%. So that's a trick. I don't really mention it too often because the chances that your bottom is going to be able to turn into 100 aren't great. It's possible if you had a 4 or a 5 or a 20. But if you have an 8, you can't turn 8 into 100 easily. So the main way to do this is divide, turn it into a decimal, turn the decimal into a percent, divide, turn it into a decimal, turn the decimal into a percent. If you can, without dividing, get it over 100, well, there's your percentage right there. But like I said, this is really kind of a shortcut. This does not work all the time, all right? Let's try one more here, and we'll wrap it up. Very similar situation. Let's say I had 17 over 10. This is one that you can do both ways, so try it both ways. You can divide it out. If we divide it, try this one on your own. If we divide it, you should get 1.7. And then to go from from the decimal to percent, we move which way? Decimal to percent is twice to the right. So that would be 170%, right? I didn't do the division for you this time, guys. I want you to practice it out a little bit. If you're stuck or something, just send me an email. I'll show you how it goes. It's only a couple steps. Dividing by 10, I don't think is too big a deal, though. Just careful with your decimal. Remember, though, what I said a minute ago. This is one of those you could do it 2 ways. Or if you can get the bottom to 100, then you have your percentage right there. So 10 can be made to 100. How do I get from 10 to 100? Well, you multiply by 10, right? What you do to the bottom, you got to do to the top. 17 times 10 is 170. And now you have 170 over 100, which is 170%. So like I said, guys, if you can, man, this marker, whew, that died right on time. If you can get it over 100, there's your percentage right there. If you're not comfortable with getting it over 100, or if you can't because this number is like a 7 or a 11, well, you'll have to divide it out, get your decimal, and turn your decimal into a percentage. So 3 different conversions, guys. Make sure you're comfortable with 6 different conversions, 3 different types. Percent to decimal, both ways, that's 2 each. Fraction to percent, both ways, that's 2 each. And decimal to fraction, both ways, that's 2 each. So a total of 6 conversions here. Again, remember, this is going to cover 1 through 31 in the homework, 7. This does not cover the back half of 7 with the word problems. We'll get into that on Thursday's lecture. So go ahead and get as much done because this homework is kind of long and complex. Get 1 through 31 done, get as much done as you can, and I will see you guys in